Hey guys, this is Kevin Cole, Director of Data and Analytics at RotoGrinders. This video is going to walk through the new Slate IQ NBA feature. Some of you may be familiar with work that I've done on showdown slates, and the key here is the key like it was there, which is we're going to look through the vast information that we have in our results DB database, which includes millions of entries, thousands of contests, past NBA slates, and we're going to match what we're seeing in today's slate to the past. Now, the way that we're matching it, the parameters that we're matching it by are the number of games that are in the slate, the number of players, the positional values by tier, by salary tier, and we bring all that together, and what we do is we pull out of these thousands of contests the 25 most similar contests, and then we break them down. We look at them in a number of ways. Specifically, we look at them as the winners, or what we normally classify as the top 0.1% of entries versus the field. And then we also look at all the different contests that fall into that sort of game count, not just the 25 most similar, but all of them, and make that for another comparison to match them side by side. And you might get some useful information that you could then apply to today's contest. So I'm going to walk through the different charts that are available in our Slate IQ for NBA. So the first chart here you'll see, it's called Slate Texture. So it has two main columns, and one is similar and one is average. Now similar comprises the 25 most similar slates that I talked about here. These are the ones that are matched to today's slates. They're going to have a number of attributes that are going to be very similar. They're the most similar slates we can find from our historical results dating back through the 2016 NBA season. Average is the average with a matching game count to the game count that we're seeing for today's slates. So that's what you're going to see there. I'll go through all the different numbers here. The first item that we have on here is the 50-50 cash line. So this is the average within those different cohorts that you need to cash on double up types of 50-50s. The second is the GPP line for the top 0.1%. Now we also have the winners right below that, so the exact winner of these contests, but a lot of these contests are different sizes. So in order to adjust and to make them all on a level playing field, the one above is the 0.1%. So you'll see that it'll always be slightly lower than what we're seeing there. And again, it's looking at the similar slates versus the average of that game count. The further you go down, the next three numbers on here are on a percentile basis between 0 and 100. And what it does is it looks at how does the 25 most similar slates rank versus the average of that slate count. So those average numbers are always going to be 50 for the stack, for the stars and scrubs, and for ownerships. And then the amount on the similar slates is going to vary quite a bit. Now for stacking, it's a formula where it gives higher numbers, higher value to the more lopsided stack. So for instance, if you have a 7-1 stack, that's going to rate higher than a 6-2 stack, which is then going to rate higher than a 6-1-1, and so on and so forth. So it's really looking for when the most successful lineups have been concentrated together. Again, this is looking at those lineups that were the winners. So these are the top 0.1% of lineups that we're talking about here. The next is stars and scrubs. Now, stars and scrubs is a formula where it looks at the concentration of the lineup. I don't want to go into too many details here because it's a little bit complicated, but it squares all the different percentage exposures. And by doing that, you get a higher number if you had, let's say, 90% exposure in one player and 10% in another than you would if you had 50-50. So this is looking at stars and scrubs, and it's saying, are you getting these very highly owned players? Are you building that kind of stars in that sort of way, and then down below, or are you valuing and spreading it out throughout the lineup? Next, ownership, and this is pretty simple. This is just looking across the lineup at the average ownership rates of players that you're actually rostering and how they compare to the rest of the field. So again, higher numbers mean you're higher on those factors, lower, of course, you're lower. Now, the chalk hit rate here. For this number, every single player that's in a winning lineup, for this number, it's the top 5 most owned players for every contest, and they're given basically a hit or a miss number, and they're considered a hit if their exposure in winning lineups is higher than the average ownership for the field, and a miss if it's not the case. And then this is just looking at those winning lineups. So what's the hit rate within these winning lineups? What's the hit rate that we've seen for these top owned players. So the higher that you have for a chalk hit rate here, the more that the chalk gives options in the most similar slates have ended up hitting in the past. The rest of the numbers here are fairly simple to see. It's the game count of the 25 most similar. That's going to pretty closely match what the game count is here. Sometimes we make it a little bit wider if we want to capture in more past slates because there are few in the database for some of the higher numbers for game count. And then the number of values that we have. Now the value is an equation which accounts for the amount of fantasy points scored divided by the salary over a particular threshold. So the values that we see here, we have it broken down by different cohorts, different tiers. We have values under 5,000, between 5 and 8, between 8 and 10, and those under 10K for the slate. So that's the main slate texture table, which goes over everything. The next table we have here is the salary spent by position. Now this is going to look at 3 different categories: the winners from the most similar slates, the field for the most similar slates, and then the average field for that game count number. And it's going to break down, these are by roster positions. These are not by the slate positions, but by the roster positions. So your traditional point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center, guard forward, and the utility position. So it has for each of those. So you can get a gauge here of where has the salary been spent more for the winners than for the field, and how does it compare to a normal game count slate. The next chart that we're looking at here is breaking down the utility position, the forward position, and the guard position, and it shows you which are the underlining slate positions that go into this. So these are the ones that DraftKings has them classified as before you're allocating them in your roster. So you can see for this one in particular, the utility position, it has a smattering of the multi-positions, so ones that have, let's say, for instance, shooting guard and small forward, or small forward and power forward, so there's a smattering of those in there, and they also are the big major positions there. And you can also click in, and you can see for the forward position, for the guard position, the same thing. The next chart here is the winner salary tiers by position. And this is similar to what we saw of just giving you the salaries, except for instead of looking at the average, we're breaking it out by tier. So it's broken out 3 to 4,000, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and so on, all the way to above 10,000 for every single one of these roster positions. And you can see in the bars here how much you could. So by looking at this one, for instance, you could see that in the 10K tier, most of it's going to the point guard position. There's also a decent amount in the center, and so on. And you can look through all these different positions and try to get an idea of, this is again how the winners of the most similar slate, so the top 0.1% have performed in the past. The next one we have here is stacking. Now this stacking looks at every single winning lineup. So again, we're looking at the top 0.1%. We're looking at all those different winning entries, and we're saying what is the biggest game stack, so the most concentrated game stack. So sometimes you can have multiple game stacks, of course, but this just looks at the biggest one for each one of those and what does it comprise of. So you can see here is a 2-5 game stack. So it means you have 2 players on one side, 5 on the other, and so on as you look further and further down. There's 1-3, 3-3, 1-2, and 2-4, and these are the different exposures that you're seeing for the winners, for the field, what the difference is, and then what the leverage is. In other words, what is the winner percentage divided by the field percentage, and where they may have differentiated themselves. In this particular one, you can see that the winners in the similar slates versus the field much more often had 2 players on one team, 5 on the other. So they had 7 players all within one game stack. And it makes sense because these numbers that we're looking at are only for a 2-game slate. And the last thing we have on here is the chalk hit rates. Now this wants to hone in on exact players from today's slate. So it's going to look at exact players who are the top 5 projected for highest ownership. And it's going to compare those to similar slates and say, how did the most owned players who were most similar to them? So players who are most similar in terms of ownership, position, fantasy point projection, all those different things are brought into here. And it's looking at those, at the past slates, and it says, how often are these on winning lineups versus what we are projecting them for? And if they're on winning lineups more often than what we're seeing as a projection, then the player might provide some decent leverage, so some positive leverage here. So it'll go through the top 5 players for every single slate on a daily basis. This will be regenerated. So just to come up from the top again, this is something we're going to provide on a daily basis. It's going to have all of these numbers, all of these charts. It's always going to refresh with the 25 most similar slates based upon what our projections for ownership and our projections for fantasy points are doing there. Those are derived from models that have been built and also adjusted by our projections team. And then in addition to this, we're going to have written content that goes along with it. And that written content is going to explain what an expert is seeing as they're going through this and maybe pick out a few players that look like they may be more favorable than you would have thought based upon this information. So that's all we have here. Hopefully this helped explain some of what's going on here. We're asking and we're hoping for your feedback here, because I'm sure that we're going to add and change and move things around based upon what you're seeing, what you think may be useful, and we appreciate your business. Thanks so much.